amazing program we've created here in conversation with people who are seeking more conversations. So we want to thank our founders for being here. And we want to welcome all the guests of the founders we have here today. Some are members of the New York Sun community and others are guests of founders. If you are interested in the founder program, which includes these monthly events that are exactly what we found out everybody's craving more of, and exactly, and then weekly calls called the Sages of the Sun, where you really get a chance to be part of the conversations with the editorial board, which many of our founders are part of every week, and upcoming events in the fall that I'm not at liberty to disclose yet, but they're pretty exciting. So if you're interested in becoming a founder, please speak to me. I'd love to tell you more about it. Tonight, we are delighted to be welcoming famed editor Tina Brown. An icon in the publishing industry, Tina was former editor of Tatler, Vanity Fair, and The New Yorker, and the founding editor of The Daily Beast. So she's written a number of highly acclaimed books, including The Diana Chronicles, and most recently, The Palace Papers, and is considered one of the world's foremost experts on Britain's royal family. The discussion with Tina will be moderated by the Sun's publisher, David Effune, and associate editor, A.R. Hoffman. Now, this program also includes all of you. For a little bit into the program, we're going to be passing around index cards and pens. We'll give you an opportunity to write down what your questions are. We'll pass them down, and our two moderators will ask those of Tina Brown. So get ready to be part of the program. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming publisher of the New York Sun, David Effune, associate editor, A.R. Hoffman, and Tina Brown.
All right. Thank you, Jean. Everyone hear me? Okay, and thank you to all of you for joining us tonight at this special New York Sun Founder Forum. It's always a great pleasure to host you, to see many good friends, familiar faces. Tonight's discussion is moderately more lighthearted than some of the others that we have addressed in the past. But sometimes, I guess, in life, it's the matters of the heart that are most serious. And there's no question that the royal family of Great Britain and the Commonwealth has been the topic of endless fascination. And we look forward to really hearing input, perspective, views from one of the foremost cultural critics of our times, but certainly of the royal family and all of the interconnected sagas that it brings to the table. So Tina, it is a special honor to have you with us tonight. A longtime advocate for journalism, and particularly, I would say, a friend of the New York Sun. I understand at one time even a columnist of the New York Sun. We're saving up now to lure you back. We haven't given up. And I'm always honored to be accompanied by my colleague here, A.R. Hoffman, our associate editor, and one of the sharpest minds in our tool shed. We'll be hearing from him more in a moment. I just want to start with this, Tina. You've come back from the UK just a couple of months ago. Yes, there was a coronation, but also this phenomenal new initiative that you have launched in memory of your late husband, Sir Harold Evans, who himself was a titan of the industry. So perhaps you want to start just by telling us a little bit about his legacy and the work that you've been doing to perpetuate that.
Thank you so much, both of you. And thank you for giving me the chance to do that. Can you all hear me okay? Well, a little louder. Okay, so when my husband, Sir Harry Evans, died in 2020, I resolved to do something for his extraordinary journalistic legacy. When Harry was the editor of the London Sunday Times, he did the most remarkable landmark investigations He spent 10 years campaigning to get compensation for the victims of thalidomide and won a great legal and journalistic victory. He exposed the cover-up of the Soviet spy Kim Philby. He did the remarkable investigation into the malfeasance of the McDonnell Douglas company over the DC-10 air crash that killed over 200 people. So he's a landmark figure really in journalism. He was actually voted greatest journalist editor of all times by his peers in 2006. So he has this great legacy. So I thought, how can we honor it? And decided to launch a foundation. And the foundation's mission would be to give a fellowship in investigative journalism to a young, early career professional, where the winning candidate could be embedded in Reuters in their investigations department, and also spend time at his alma mater, Durham University. We chose Reuters because David Thompson of Thomson Reuters was an enormous admirer of Harry's, and his grandfather owned the Sunday Times when Harry was the editor. So David Thompson very kindly gave us a very major bequest and involved Reuters in it as well. So we launched it, and we have a first fellow has come and has been absolutely great, is already making a lot of success with bylines at Reuters. And then we also did an annual convening as it now will be, which I call Truth Tellers. And it brings together investigative journalists from all over the world to talk about, how to be great journalists, essentially. And we had an amazing day in London. We had everybody you could imagine in journalism, including the grand finale of Woodward and Bernstein together, the Mick and Keith of investigative journalism. It was great. We even had the writer of Succession as a piece of light relief. We had John Poulos, who won the Dominion case, and then we had pretty much every editor and investigative journalist you can imagine. So it was a remarkable day, and it was such a success. We're going to do that annually.
So you didn't invite the Murdochs?
We did not invite the Murdochs. However, the phone hacking trials were raging around us as we sat there, but it was a pretty good.
I asked because I've heard that part of Jerry Hall's divorce settlement was that she can't talk to the writers of Succession.
This is true. But there was quite a lot of talk. Actually, the other great journalist who was there was Nick Davis, who exposed, of course, all the phone hacking in the News of the World and The Guardian. So it was rich in Murdoch stories.
So we've got to try and organize. We've got a lot that we want to talk about with you into a few different categories. We're going to start with King Charles and Queen Consort Camilla. Mm-hmm. Then we'll have a section on Harry and Meghan and the Cambridges as well. And then a final section on the royals in general and their significance in society. And then we'll have time for questions from the audience, and we'll make sure to get to as many of those as we can. So for the first section, I pass you over to AR to get the ball rolling.
Great. And let me just reiterate how excited we are to have all of you here, and especially to have Tina here with us. By way of asking about the new king, I want to read something that Princess Diana told you a long time ago over lunch at the Four Seasons, not far from here. You reported this in a piece called A Woman in Earnest. It was a lunch you had with Anna Wintour and Princess Diana. And this is what Diana said. You see, Charles is not a leader. He's a follower. He was born to the wrong job. He'd have been so happy with a house in Tuscany, being a host to artists. He just wasn't cut out for what he got. But just a little while ago, you wrote a piece in Time magazine, the cover piece in Time magazine, entitled Why King Charles is Worth the Wait. So let me ask you, is King Charles worth the wait? Was Diana right? Or has Charles changed in the meantime?
Well, thank you. I think both things are true. I mean, Charles was not cut out for this job. He, for many years, would have done anything to get out of it, really, but he was embalmed in duty, and there was never any chance that he ever felt there would be to avoid his destiny. And so he just carved out for himself the only thing that he could do, really, which was to follow his own particular passions. And one of the things I do like about Charles, he does have these he has real passions, unlike a lot of people. They're authentic passions. You know, he's so ahead of his time in his passionate, belief in the climate, and the planet was in danger. He turned Highgrove, his house, into this organic farm years before anybody thought that was an important thing to do. You know, he was interested in very offbeat topics at that time, like, the fate of the marsh Arabs, architecture, somewhat, retrogressive views on architecture, but passionately held. So he just sort of pursued these different interests, which gradually amounted to being rather significant. I mean, he actually created a very, very substantial foundation out of all these commitments and desires. And now the Prince's Trust is, a very well-regarded and, very well-funded organizations, which does a lot, for marginalized urban youth, for culture, for crafts in places. He's a big funder of, arts and crafts in Afghanistan. I mean, he's very quirky, but it's real stuff, and actually in the end has amounted to rather an amazing legacy. So I've sort of really come around to Charles, and I actually think so would Diana have come around. I mean, by the time Diana died, I think she was beginning to understand Charles in a way that she couldn't when she married him essentially as a child. She was 19 when she got engaged to Charles, which when you look back now seems so young. He was 32. She was a young 19. He was a extremely old 32.
Right.
So
one of the powerful pieces of that article, I think, is your worry at the end of it that Diana was going on the wrong path a little bit with Dodi Al-Fayed and other things, and the sort of irony that in the long run, it's Charles who sort of moved towards substance in a certain way.
Well, I think she was moving towards substance, actually, but of course was cut off at 36. I mean, her last act, essentially, of going off with Dodi Al-Fayed was just an act of desperation, And, I mean, the other thing she did say to me at that lunch was just how lonely she was, because she said I saw her in the June before her death in August, and she said, I dread the summer. I dread the boys going off to Balmoral, and I'm left here on my own. I said, well, surely, I couldn't believe that someone like herself would not be inundated with invitations. She said, well, I am, but nobody really wants to have someone who's going to be pursued by the press like I am. I mean, I ruined their holiday, so actually I can't. And it was a very lonely cri de coeur. And the irony about the Al-Fayed invitation was she went because she thought she was going to be safe. And it was the opposite. She went because, as she liked to put it, he has all the toys: plane, boat, security, servants, all the things that she thought could be the wraparound for her being able to have a fabulous holiday in the south of France. Whereas, of course, in the end, it was the opposite. He was a publicity hound and encouraged all of that madness, which, of course, ended in the Alma Tunnel.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you, if you had to sort of distill it, what kind of king do you think Charles will be? And how do those idiosyncrasies that you've articulated play out into his strengths and weaknesses?
Well, I think the idiosyncrasies are now rather beloved, because people do think that he's decent. They're bored by him, but they think he's decent. And, of course, his biggest passion, which is about the environment and climate, happens to be very on point with the zeitgeist. So, actually, it is ironic that after all these years, for years he was mocked for it, but now as he comes to the throne, it so happens that the culture is in sync with him. So that's been, for him, a very gratifying and validating thing. So in terms of what he will be, he cannot anymore be a campaigner as he was, essentially, for all those years as Prince of Wales. But he can be a great convener, and he does know and knows how to use the convening power of monarchy. There are very few people who, when they get a call saying this is Buckingham Palace on the phone, will you come for dinner, they don't drop everything and go.
Sure.
And you've only got to see the incredible sort of show of force every time he does anything. Liz Truss, the flyby Prime Minister of England, told him he could not go to the COP22 summit was it 22? I can't remember what it was. The UN summit the last UN summit, because it would be a sort of political act for him to go, and he was very annoyed about it privately. However, he gave the reception the night before it began, and that reception was actually by far the most, august, well-attended, and it was the hottest ticket in Europe. Everybody wanted to be there. So that is his real strength now, and he knows how to use it. The Queen wasn't a convener, actually. She really wasn't interested in bringing together all kinds of interesting people to talk to her about the state of the world. She had her interest in horse and racing, and and she would have her lunches at Buckingham Palace, where her private secretary chose this person and this person to come. But she didn't use her position as a convener. Charles does. He has heads of banks. He has, it's amazing the people who go when he calls.
Let me ask you about his wife. Did you ever imagine Camilla would be queen? And would you say that the marriage and the affair, the love affair between Camilla and Charles is sort of the great Windsor love story of this generation?
Well, I do really, because Charles gets absolutely no points for wanting to be with sort of an age-appropriate woman who likes gardening and dogs. He really doesn't. But this is the woman he's always wanted to be with, always, and he still does. And I think that is actually, it ought to be considered a great love affair. It sort of is a bit now, or rather, anyway, people have accepted that she means so much to him. The truth is that marital love is the foundation for a successful monarch. We've seen again and again how incredibly important that spouse is. But for the Queen Mother, George VI would have been a kind of stammering introvert without her push and her steel. She really sort of elevated him in a way that he could never have done without her. I think Prince Philip was enormously important to the Queen, underestimated actually what a role he played, because he kind of stopped her being, she was very timid really, the Queen, in many ways, and I think that she would have been dominated by her private secretaries completely if it weren't for Philip sort of bringing her down to earth and laughing, and he was so iconoclastic. It was very, very good for the Queen. It brought her out of her sort of shell, if you like. And so it goes on, I think Kate has been enormously important to William, and without Kate, I don't think that William could face what is ahead of him. So these marital relationships are enormously important, and you saw how Charles has really been transformed by his relationship with Camilla, by his marriage to Camilla. Since he married her now 18 years ago, he's transformed from the sort of lugubrious sort of, Eeyore figure that he was as Prince of Wales.
Great. Maybe we'll move on to another marriage now with Harry and Meghan.
Dun dun dun.
Let's call them the Bonnie and Clyde of the royal family.
Well,
while we're at it, they were visiting New York not so long ago. They spun up quite the story, which attracted attention around the world. But for those of us who are New Yorkers, the idea of a 2-hour car chase in Manhattan didn't ring that precise. Sounds like, but in Manhattan in 2 hours you can go 2 blocks, and there's certainly no chasing going on. But where do you think a story like that came from, and what were the motivations behind trying to put that idea front and center?
Well, one of Harry's close people said to me, the trouble with Harry and Meghan is they're addicted to drama. So I think there is a bit of that. I think that a small thing gets inflated into being like, we had this massive thing happen, and it really wasn't that massive. I think, that, I'm very mixed about all of it. The fact is that I admire Harry's bravery, actually, in suing the tabloids as he has been, and he's been in the dock, just recently, bearing witness to all of that. His life has been utterly ruined by the press, all of his life. So he is, there's no doubt about it now, paranoid and overreactive in every way about the press. So, he catches sight of one paparazzi and he literally sort of flips out. It's like a sort of PTSD for him. But I mean, I think the problem with their relationship is that I think in a marriage, you either have, this is a generalization, one spouse who calms the other one down and says, let's think about this, or you have the one who stokes you. And unfortunately, I think that Harry, who's already a deeply emotional person, is married now to someone who stokes it, and as a result, and then they get into this sort of victimology à deux thing, where they're sort of in this, it's us against the world mentality. I mean, I do think they went through a great, it's not pleasant to marry into the Windsor family, but I would say that probably Meghan was about the worst kind of candidate for it, in that she really didn't understand it and was utterly dismayed when she realized what it was really like.
So it seems that, this story, car chase, paparazzi, might have been designed to draw parallels with Princess Diana, another major city, a car chase. That's certainly been a narrative that they've sought to propagate. Certainly in the Oprah interview, Prince Harry keeps repeating that my biggest concern is that my wife will meet the fate of my mother. Is your sense that is a genuine fear, or is that sort of part of the drama, an opportunity to?
I think it is a genuine fear because he is sort of haunted by that. But I also think that Meghan is constantly looking to turn her press around, essentially, and feels that narrative is the best way to go about it. I think they've made every mistake in terms of how they've played their desire to exit the royal family. One of the most, to me, sort of baffling things is that, all the way through the discussions about Harry leaving, and the Queen always thought that Harry at some point would leave. He was very unhappy. He hated it, So I think I was told that nobody was particularly surprised that they sort of wanted to bail. The question was on how they did it and on what terms, essentially. And in discussions, and there were many before the crisis sort of happened, it was always made clear to Harry, security is going to be an issue because it's not the royals who pay for the security. It is the British government. And the British government were never going to pay for Harry and Meghan to be sitting in Montecito, not being royals, having round-the-clock security. And had the royals even intimated that they wanted that, they'd have been absolutely killed. Imagine what the tabloids would have said, if the British government was paying for Harry's security for them to be. And he just willfully, essentially, ignored that fact and left, and then has been badgering ever since to have this security that he feels that he needs. And he's not going to get it. And now, so Charles who's very, very rich, could, I suppose, pay the 7 to 8 million a year that it costs to have round-the-clock security, but he doesn't want to particularly. And also, they left because they said they wanted financial independence, and then were stunned when his father said he wasn't going to pay for it. It's just a big load of sort of mixed, messed up perceptions, essentially.
What do you think Meghan wants ultimately?
Well, I think that I'm pretty sure that this whole thing, that Harry's sort of fury about this mysterious, constant grudge about the way Meghan was treated was essentially marital embarrassment, because he didn't want to let her know the reality of his situation. I think that when Meghan met Harry, she really thought she was going to be Angelina Jolie crossed with Amal Clooney squared with Diana, right? It was going to be into the stratosphere, humanitarian superstar. And together they hatched this wonderful life they were going to have as these big global humanitarian superstars. The biggest problem that she didn't understand was that the monarchy is a hierarchy. And essentially, Harry was sort of a penny ante prince, really. He had $350,000 a year or something in the royal sort of grant. He had some invested money from his mother. He actually inherited about 15 million from his mother, probably about 25 or 30 by now, after investments, etc., but all tied up in trusts and all the rest of it. There was no palace. I mean, they were going to have to wait. They would have got it if they'd just been a little bit patient. They could have had an apartment in Kensington Palace, but had a lot of lead issues. And it had been inhabited by, I think it was the Duke or Duchess of Gloucester. It was going to take 3 years to do it up, and so they were in this cottage. I mean, all of these things were, not what Meghan expected. I mean, she thought she was going to be sort of living in Windsor Castle and being Angelina Jolie, and instead of which she was living in Not Cot, as they call it, Nottingham Cottage, with sort of 2 bedrooms, having to kind of be next in line, for all of the different royal gigs, where she was going to be expected to kind of open, hospitals in Scunthorpe, and that wasn't what she had in mind at all. And there was this sort of mounting resentment and disappointment. So, and it was compounded by the fact that they were superstars at that point. I mean, and then there was the kind of competition that did grow up between Kate and William, because in fact, Meghan and Harry are way more appealing than frankly, than William and Kate. I mean, Kate is idolized, but the Sussexes are much more interesting. They're much sexier, they're more modern, they're more interesting, and everybody loves reading about them. And, as we saw with Princess Diana, what they used to call, the Queen would ominously call the upstage problem with Diana, where even the Queen got annoyed when, Parliament opens and all they write about was Diana's new hairdo, This was becoming more and more edgy inside. And all of this meant that the Sussexes felt they were being contained. They didn't have enough staff. They wanted a much bigger staff to enable the Angelina Jolie scenario. They wanted a palace. There wasn't one available that week. All of these, you can see how it goes on. And so basically she's really turning around and saying to Harry, what is this? I don't like it.
Well,
and she didn't.
So, this sort of picture that you're painting, sort of amounts to, let's call it a cascade of misunderstandings and unmet expectations and a comedy of errors. There are certainly those in the British press and beyond who have a far more insidious view of Meghan. And a lot of this traces back to how she's behaved with her own family, with other high-profile relationships that she's maintained. And certainly, you speak about sort of Harry's discontent all the way back. True, but he hadn't really acted on it. As far as everybody else knew, he was doing his job and, sucking it up. Along comes Meghan, and all of a sudden, the entire royal family is thrown into disarray. There's certainly a punitive component to the way that they're acting now. Certainly that's how it appears to a lot of people. And, I'd say it's not a stretch to say a large segment of the British public, even the American public, view Meghan the way the Romans view Cleopatra, as the wicked witch who is trying to destroy everything and seize everything to her own advantage. Would you sort of dismiss all of that as being, a bridge too far? Or do you see that there's an element of Meghan that is a little bit more insidious than...
No, undoubtedly. As I said at the beginning about the stoking, I think Meghan is determined. She won't let it go. She's not going to ever be able to be conciliatory, and that is a very bad... Harry can only be sort of released from that if she'll let him, essentially. I do feel she's been somewhat overly drawn as being the only culprit, because I do think that Harry saw her as an exit strategy. I think that he was very excited by what seemed to be her worldly grasp of things like Netflix. And if you were faced with the Commonwealth or Netflix, what would you choose? I think most of us would choose Netflix, actually. Where I think
this
Meghan...
event, by the way, is sponsored by HBO.
Okay. Where I think Meghan was really short-sighted was, having said all those things that are so boring about being in that position, I mean, all she had to do was wait a bit. All she had to do was wait. I mean, you know, the Queen, in fact, was very smart. I mean, she gave her Vice President of the Commonwealth Foundation job and a patronage of the National Theatre. Fabulous patronages, you know. And if she had wanted to be the Angelina Jolie figure, she could have been travelling around the world representing the Commonwealth, which is a hell of a lot more prestigious than, I don't know, the Global Citizens Concert or whatever it is she does now. So the irony is they're in fact reduced to doing the worst aspects of the things they left behind. I mean, they go to kind of cheesy charity events with red carpets now, and everybody paid for a ticket, but it's way less prestigious than being, you know, the star billing at some massive Commonwealth tour, you know. So they've really, and I think that has left them furious. I mean, I think the realization that they blew it is what's actually animating a lot of their rage now.
Where does this go, you know, especially considering, you know, how they may be feeling? I imagine if that's how they're feeling together, you know, I don't want to be presumptive, climb inside Harry's head, but, you know, he's also come to this place through certainly what others in his family might see as, you know, quite a serious betrayal. Do you see that coming home to roost at some point? You know, if you're making the odds, how long does this marriage last?
Well, I think that they're sort of, I think the sort of, you know, that the sort of folie à deux thing gets probably, it's more likely to think to get more intense as it did with the Duke and Duchess of Windsor. I mean, we mustn't forget that they are very similar in circumstance. You know, the Duke and Duchess, I mean, what was the Duke of Windsor's biggest misery was that, you know, England would never call her HRH, you know, that he'd given up the king, that, you know, he'd given up his crown, but he spent the rest of his life sort of wanting to be acknowledged that he still was king. And that's sort of quite similar to the Sussexes, really. And their situation became more and more sort of isolated and out of it. And, you know, there's a strong sort of FOMO now that the Sussexes obviously have in seeing that they're sitting there in Montecito and all of the world is coming to, you know, William and the legitimate royals. I think it could be, the other alternative is, I mean, I think that Harry, despite the fact that his poll numbers are, you know, in the tank in England, it would not be hard for Harry to win back the British public, because essentially the British public likes Harry, really. They've always liked him. And there's a kind of affection for Harry and a certain admiration for Harry. And he would be accepted back if he wanted to come back. But I don't see how he could ever come back with Meghan. So it's one of those things where they're hoping that he will come back one day without Meghan. I don't know whether that, you know, that for him to admit that it hadn't worked, as it were, would be too hard, I suspect. And, you know, there are the children who he adores. So it's more likely, I think, that Meghan will get tired of it, because right now her career is sort of nowhere. You know, she has not, I mean, Harry will always he'll always be royal. Whatever anybody says, he's the son of the king and the brother of the next one. And he genuinely was served his country for 10 years, and he was a very respected soldier. I mean, much admired by his troops. He was brave. He was he's a legitimate veteran, you know, who has done very good things since he left with, you know, his Invictus charities. So Harry's got the military still, and he's got the fact that he's royal. Meghan is sort of grasping for her brand, if you like. I mean, you know, she doesn't have anything over the last 7 years, that's 6 years, that's been any sort of initiative that's got any kind of rigor to it. And so it's possible she'll start to think, you know, but for you, I'd be a star actress, you know.
Right.
Did you enjoy reading Spare?
I thought Spare was a rip-snorting read, actually. Yeah. I actually thought Spare was the ghostwriter did a very good job of Spare. And it was a genuine hand grenade. I mean, you know, Harry the hand grenade. He really, the surprising part to me was how he stuck it to William. I thought that was a real sad thing that he did that to William, because I don't actually believe, and I really don't, that their relationship was this dark, sort of, Cain and Abel thing going way back. I mean, everybody who knows them says that it was the closest of relationships. And even though there may have been a bit of edge here and there, the fact was that they were very, very close. And it was only really in this, it began to go wrong pre-Meghan. That is, I will say in fairness to Meghan, because when Harry left the army and came back, he then suddenly realized, what am I got? I'm the spare. And that's when he felt the spare, when he came out of the army, which was probably the biggest mistake that was made, that he came out of the army at all.
Mm.
What do you think it would take for the brothers to reconcile? Do you see that on the horizon, or are they too far gone?
Well, it's interesting, George VI and the Duke of Windsor never reconciled. And they also had been very close when they were princes. And it was when, Edward VIII abdicated, and sort of it was very similar. He left, and George felt really betrayed. And as the years went by, it hardened. I mean, rancor tends to harden, I think, rather than thaw. I thought that when the Queen died, that might have been an opportunity for something, but the opportunity was missed. And I don't think that Charles is good at that either. I mean, they're not good with their emotions, as we know. They're not good. I mean, I think part of the problem is that Charles doesn't use a cell phone. So, I mean, it might sound trivial, but if you have to call your father and get him through his private secretary, you have no text relationship or any kind of quick, warm, spontaneous intimacy. Mm-hmm. He has to literally phone his private secretary and say, I want to speak to His Majesty. And at that point, things tend to die on the vine, once you've done that. So I don't really see how it can, and I don't think at this point it's in William's interest particularly to reconcile with Harry. I mean, the public would want nothing more than to see those brothers back. And in fact, when you had that, there was a phony moment that was very effective for the public when, after the Queen's death, they came out together, if you remember. Oh my God, everybody was so happy to see those two together. It felt like all's right with the world, the two princes are back. But, ultimately, they outshine the Waleses, as they're now called. And I don't think that Kate particularly wants to see them back, and I don't think that William does. So I think we've now got personal rancor has now melded with a beady professional sense that actually they're better off without them being there.
And William has a cell phone, right?
William has a cell phone.
So that opportunity exists.
It does.
Right, I mean, they have an opportunity to connect.
They do, but
in a slightly more fluid fashion.
William does not want to reconcile with Harry at this point. How you bring William round is now the issue. Because he was actually, Harry was very, very nasty about him in his book.
Yeah.
And I think, and about his wife, so I think he feels very, very brutally hurt. I think that William looks very unhappy for the last year or two. I think that there's a kind of settled melancholy about him now. And, the people who were close to them said to me that, Harry and Harry's relationship, people talk about how important William was for Harry, my arm around him and all the rest he used to say. But actually, Harry was very important for William because Harry was the only person who could tease William, who could speak of him as a peer, who could have fun, who could share his memories, who could cheer him up, when that awful sort of cage closed around him. And he's lost that. So there's no one now in his life except for Kate that he has that kind of peer relationship with. And I think it causes him a lot of sadness.
Now, is your sense at this point the worst is behind the royals? They've sort of staked out their positions and they'll figure out sort of how to get along where they are? Or is your sense that this entanglement will continue, that the resentments will find other ways to manifest themselves? Are we going to see more bombs from Montecito thrown towards Buckingham Palace? Or is everybody going to take a step back now and get on with their lives?
Well, I think that the Sussexes have realised that their poll ratings are in the tank. And they're actually losing luster even here because they've shot their bolt. They've done it, right? They've trashed the family. And the great question in terms of sustaining their celebrity here is going to be, well, what's next? That's all the people in Hollywood say. It's like, well, what have you got aside from trashing your family? It is for that reason. I don't actually think they have got anything else. So I think what could easily happen is a second book out of financial necessity, right? Because it's a very expensive lifestyle, security. I mean, what are they going to sell?
Will that be Meghan's book?
Probably. And so it goes on. And so that's the question. At the moment, they are deploying an avowed sort of, pause of where they're not going to, but they've thrown so many bombs at this point that I think it's going to be 5 years before anybody really believes it. And I don't see how Meghan is going to be able to bear being out of the limelight that long.
Let me ask you, at the end of that piece in Time magazine, you wrote, at a time when everything seems to be bollocksed up in Britain, sometimes spectacularly, tribal and atavistic beliefs in the monarchy, both mortal and majestic, somehow ineffably trundle on. And my question is two-part. One is to situate the monarchy in contemporary Britain, with what's happened, of course, with Boris Johnson, with Liz Truss. You mentioned the kind of post-Brexit landscape, and so how does the new king and the monarchy fit into that context? And secondly, is in America. I thought to go back to that lunch with Princess Diana in winter. One of the most amazing parts of that lunch is where you talk about Diana's lust and yearning for America. And America as the home of celebrity, and America as the true land of fame and excess. And so the kind of the role of the monarchy in America and in Britain.
Well, oddly, I mean, when I wrote the first edition of the Palace Papers, it came out 2 months before the Queen died. So I wrote it, the conclusion was written before the Queen died. And I really thought that when the Queen died, there would be some kind of national nervous breakdown because of the way she had come to embody the stoicism of the nation. She'd almost become so entwined with the nation's self-image, and she's the last sort of symbol of the wartime, Great Britain, if you like, that it was going to be a sort of collapse. But actually, the collapse didn't come from that angle. It came from the British political system, in which the Tories sort of lost the plot and went over a cliff. And as a result, oddly, Prince Charles sort of emerged then as the most sort of senior statesman from his own country. I mean, it was a piece of luck for Charles that the whole Liz Truss debacle, etc., happened, because suddenly he was like, he was hosting this reception at Buckingham Palace with every world leader. He's on first name terms with every single emperor, king, prime minister. He knew their parents. So he actually, at this point, is a very, very polished statesman, and the Foreign Office regard him as a really excellent sort of missile to try and heal, for instance, the wounds with Europe. It's not an accident that his first tour as king, royal tour as king, was supposed to go to France, but unfortunately there were too many riots in the streets for him to go. But he did go to Germany and spoke German. And there's a lot of German in that royal family, as we know. Prince Philip's 4 sisters were all married to Nazis, but people don't like talking about that very much. But, so Charles actually has become this very polished ambassador for his country. So, strangely, that's all good, right, for the monarchy. And I think in a post-Brexit situation, even more so, because, had Boris Johnson stayed, he was planning to really sort of exploit the monarchy in a way they didn't like. Sort of somehow kind of using them as a kind of symbol of, the Union Jack at all points. So at a time of enormous volatility, the fact is that the monarchy stands above partisan politics. It is a unifying force. And as we saw during the Queen's Jubilee, and indeed her funeral, and indeed the coronation, it can bring the British public out in a way that nothing can. Only a sort of, totalitarian dictator who has to force people into the streets to cheer can get those kind of crowds. And all of those crowds came voluntarily and hugely intergenerational, hugely ethnic mix of people who just regard the monarchy as essentially the sort of living history of the country. So I think the monarchy, strangely, is in rather a strong position. Where it is vulnerable and it could blow up, and I mean that, is this whole question of the colonial sort of kickback that's happening at the moment. That could build in a way that could be quite difficult, frankly, for them. You already saw in that ill-fated tour of Jamaica that
chain link fence.
The chain link fence, and standing in the back of sort of Mountbatten's car, with Kate in a huge tea tray hat, and the whole thing was just, oh my God, it was so ill-conceived. And the palace can be just so clueless, when it comes to imagery. And I think that's a threat, because particularly the younger generation are far more aggrieved about the colonial past that's growing. And there is the whole reparations movement. We're seeing it in museums across the country of returning artifacts and Benin bronzes and Elgin marbles. And I mean, if you start talking about reparations and returning things, all I can say is you should go and see Clive of India's house, of his family. It's just stuffed with loot, right? Imperial loot. And there's nothing more of a symbol of imperial loot than the monarchy itself. So that could become, I think, quite difficult. Charles is trying to be proactive about that. He's just opened the Windsor Archives for the first time to scholars of colonial history, and to study the monarchy's relationship with colonialism, which was, I think, a very smart move on his part. But I see that as the kind of shadow that could escalate, and they're going to have to really figure out all of those things.
Do you have a favorite royal? Someone who's the most interesting, or just the weirdest, or?
Well, I like Prince Philip, actually, but thought he was hilarious. Just because he always said exactly what he thought, and he was so, iconoclastic. I do like Camilla. I mean, I think she has a great sense of humor. And I also admire her toughness, actually. I mean, she really has withstood the most unbelievable press abuse. I mean, we've heard a lot about the press abuse during the Sussex's situation, but, I mean, no one was trashed like Camilla. I mean, she was referred to as an old boot, an old bat, an old bag, and all this. I mean, in fact, to the point that she used to sign her letters to Charles, her love letters, "Your devoted old bag," because she had been trashed so often. I mean, there was even, in a restaurant, there was a starter which was smoked haddock Parker bowls. So she has really. So I mean, it was a pretty amazing moment when you see her crowned. I mean, I thought that was the most incredible moment of the whole coronation, was the Camilla element. I mean, when the choir started singing "Vivat Camilla Regina," the what? Like, Vivat Camilla Regina? Of course, TikTok blew up and said, why are they talking about Camilla's vagina? But I mean, it was a pretty incredible thing to see that happening and her being crowned. And you couldn't help but think, what on earth were William and Harry thinking?
Sure.
As the dreaded mistress had the crown lowered onto her head by the Archbishop of Canterbury. Yeah. I mean, it's pretty epic.
So I know, you've got more questions, but in the meantime, we want to give everybody an opportunity to ask. So we'll hand out some cards and pens. If anybody has a question to ask, just write them down, and we'll try and get through as many as we can. If you want to start distributing them.
Let me just follow up on that, Tina, and just talk a little bit more about Camilla. Did you ever think she'd be? Did you ever think she'd be queen? Do you think she thought she'd be queen?
Never. I mean, the whole goal was just to get her out of the shadows. I mean, they spent years trying to get her out of the shadows. And I mean, in my book, The Palace Papers, I talk about her journey, from this mistress who was just reviled, how they kept trying to bring her out. And I mean, there was the divorce with Diana, and she began to be sort of introduced into public life at the side of Charles, and then no sooner were they beginning to kind of emerge when Diana's killed in the car crash. And then Diana becomes, this absolutely sainted icon, essentially, and Camilla has to go back into the shadows for like another 2 years, you know. So she's kept on, but she's advanced, you know, slowly. And she's never put a foot wrong, actually. I mean, Camilla has never said a word. She's never given an interview except, you know, 1 or 2 controlled sort of things with friends about, you know, her book club or whatever. She has never spoken about her situation, nor has her ex-husband, Andrew Parker Bowles, who was there at the coronation, smiling like, for some reason, like the Queen Mother or something. I mean, you know, he just looked like he's in on it all. You know, it's very remarkable that she's never, and as a result, that she won. You know, she got there. And, you know, it was the Queen's great gift to Charles that she said before she died, you know, before her jubilee, that it was her wish, as she put it, that Camilla would, when Charles ascended the throne, be known as Queen Consort. And that was Mummy's, you know, good piece of estate planning to make sure that controversy was taken off the table for Charles's first months as king.
Do you like The Crown?
I love The Crown. I think the last season wasn't so good, but I think the early seasons were fantastic. Yeah.
So there's some dialogue while we're talking about The Crown. I think it's Prince Philip who brings it up. This idea that there are 2 strains in the Windsor family. You know, the more sort of demure, committed to duty and doing what's right, the boring royals, and then there are the rebels, you know, like Duke of Windsor, Prince Harry. Do you identify a similar pattern, or is that a little bit simplistic?
Well, I think the duality can also be imposed. I mean, we don't know what Princess Margaret would have been like, for instance, if she'd had something to do. You know, I mean, she was much more, in a way, intellectually venturous and everything than her sister, but she wasn't allowed even to have an education. Her sister got the education, and she was only taught, you know, piano and French. But there is a bit of that, yes. But I think it's true in every family. I mean, obviously, the abiding fascination of the House of Windsor is the tension between the institution and the fallible humans. You know, I mean, the idea of the monarchy now is of a sort of sacralized British family, and who's able to live up to that? Not many families that I know. So there's always going to be, you know, a miscreant, winners, losers, you know, the black sheeps, all of that, as there are in any family. And it's writ large and becomes irresistible soap opera for all of us.
Let's just jump back for a second to the press battle that's ongoing. I mean, you mentioned that, you know, they made his life hell. But I guess, you know, usually you've got to give them something to feed on. So, you know, it's true that at times they've been as aggressive when it comes to William. It's certainly Kate, weighty Katie as they called her. But, you know, Harry had certainly given the press a great deal to jump on. I mean, if you're in the public eye, you know, certainly that's an expectation. It's true that in his case, he was born into it. It's not something that he chose. But, you know, today that you have the South Park episode that makes fun of the publicity, the privacy tour. You know, we're going on a big tour talking about how much privacy we want. So how much would you say that, you know, the press is to blame, and how much would you say, you know, really Harry's responsible for his own pickle, and if he really wanted this all to go away, he should do what Camilla does and just pipe down a little bit. And
well, I think that's true. I mean, I think that it's true that the press really made his life a misery until, but you know, since he came out of the army, and he's really since the last sort of 6 or 7 years, he has really given everybody a lot to write about, willingly and almost bafflingly. I mean, there was no reason. He could have got away with Spare with being much less incendiary and revelationary than it was. I think that he was in a state of such fury that he just decided, I'm going to say what I want to say. But then, of course, he has to live with the consequences of it. the fact is that there is a way to be private if you're royal. I mean, William and Kate actually have a really private life. I mean, we really don't know anything about them, actually. It's all just, you know, sugar-coated stuff that's dropped to the press here and there. They want to be private, and they can. The Queen and Philip wanted to be private, and they were. And, you know, Camilla, as I've said, you know, she's pretty private, and they don't talk. So you can be private. And plenty of movie stars know how to be private too, and they are. So yes, they have no idea how to be private. I don't think they really understand what it needs, and I don't think really Meghan did want to be private. I think she wanted to be a huge star. I mean, we know it because in the course of my reporting, you know, when she was on Suits, she used to badger the public relations person to get her name in the papers. Badger. So there is a lot of hypocrisy to that, yeah.
Let me ask you on that, and this is reflective of some of the questions we've gotten. In your two books about the royals, and highly recommend the Palace Papers, have it here. How do you report on the royals? Who leaks, who talks, who doesn't talk? How do you sort of navigate anonymous sources? Just to kind of take us into your kind of writing studio and newsroom, and how these books come together.
Well, for each of these books, I interviewed about 250 people. I have a wide range of contacts in this world. I mean, I know people who know them as friends. I know people who worked in the palace closely with them. And then it's a question of getting the trust of the people to want to talk to you. And then you have to build it up, you know, very carefully, and prove that you're responsible. I mean, I was very pleased in the Palace Papers that the people I interviewed felt that I'd got it right, you know, so I didn't have angry letters when the book came out, because I felt that I did right by the contacts. You know, I never betray a contact, and I use their material carefully. I mean, it's agony doing a royal book. It's very hard because you have to sort of build it up bit by bit, and you sometimes, you know, go off and see some elderly duchess in the country and have an agonizing 3 hours lunch and end up with something about this much, you know. But it's worth going for that, you know, thing that gives you the color to make it much better.
Saying, you know, in the audience question, there are some themes. This one is a bit risque. Do you think the rumors of William's dalliances are true? There's a few questions along those lines.
We'll never know about that. They never know. I mean, you know, those Windsor men, they certainly are used to having things their own way, let's put it that way. The truth is that the most powerful woman in the royal family right now is Kate. You know, it all hangs on Kate. If anything went wrong with the William and Kate marriage, that's it. It's done. And in that sense, I think the monarchy is way more fragile than it's ever been. Because, you know, in generations past, because of privacy and the fact the media weren't reporting on it, you know, these marriages could, you know, all kinds of stuff could happen, and yet the imagery of the monarchy was untouched. I think people would not accept, you know, a Wales marriage collapse. You know, I think that they would feel this is the time to be done with it. So there's a lot of leverage, shall we say, in Kate at this point. You know, she knows that she's the most powerful person in the family, and that's a source of strength for any wife, I would say.
Let me ask you, and this is a question from our audience, about this resemblance between Meghan and Diana. I mean, are there, you know...
I see no resemblance at all. I really don't. I don't know what this idea is that there's a resemblance between them.
Well, people look at an outsider who's come into the family who was somewhat ostracized.
Well, I mean...
Relationship with Charles, this sort of thing.
You know, I understand the superficial resemblance, someone who came into the family, etc., but they are so different. I mean, Diana was an absolute blue-blooded aristocrat who had been raised, you know, her grandfather, her father, they'd all been equerries to the Queen, so she completely got the whole royal thing. Furthermore, Diana never would have left the royal family if Charles had been in love with her. I mean, there's a huge difference. The only reason that Diana sort of fell out with the royal family was because the marriage went wrong, and she wanted her own agency, and Charles was extremely jealous of her. So all of those things were the reasons why Diana was sort of alienated, if you like, and became more and more angry. Yes, she definitely would have. There are some resemblances in that Diana, like Meghan, understood that she had a much greater charisma in many ways than the palace allowed her to show. You know, that there was trying to contain a star inside a hierarchy is a very, very difficult thing. Even if you're a big movie star, a big star, for instance, in a TV show, bigger than all the other people, it's going to create resentments amongst the rest of the cast. And in a way, you know, the monarchy is a kind of slightly mouldering studio system, frankly, in which everybody jostles for most attention. I mean, they all compare notes, who's been in the royal circular more, you know, the court circular more than the other, and how many gigs so-and-so has, and did they get any attention for their showing up at the dog show in Somerset, and why weren't they covered, and all of that stuff is real. I mean, I think, and if you have one member of the family who's a superstar, it really grates on the rest. And certainly Meghan, the Queen immediately began to see that Meghan was going to be the same kind of irritant that Diana was. But having said that, I mean, Diana spent, 17 years being exemplary as a Princess of Wales. I mean, she was going to openings of hospitals in Guildford and things. That's what she did most of her time. And in fact, she only became a sort of a global superstar after the separation, actually. Before that, when her famous AIDS visit, when, she shook hands with the AIDS patient, that was in Middlesex Hospital. She wasn't off in a glamorous foreign trip. She was actually at Middlesex Hospital. And most of her charity work, it was all sort of UK-based and very much of traditional, Save the Children Fund, Red Cross, those kind of things that she did. So I think there's quite a lot of difference. And I don't think that... and Diana, for instance, always wanted William to be king. She would have been very, very sad indeed at the boys falling out. She always thought that William would be there for Harry and that Harry would be there for William, and supporting William as king is what Harry would do. So I think although she would have been, very, very, very concerned and empathetic about his mental issues, which she developed, I think she would have been very, very sad at him leaving.
And, of course, Diana, as you said before, was 19 and had, yes, an upbringing, but little experience in sort of navigating public life. Meghan was, 39?
36, yeah.
36, and had been, a B-level celebrity for some time.
Yes.
And
she was far more seasoned as a, world player, as it were, than Diana was. Diana was a child. And, so there's a lot of differences. I understand what you mean about the family difficulty. I mean, and that's, by the way, not just true of Meghan. I mean, when Prince Philip entered the royal family, he had a terrible, terrible time, because he hated being this kind of consort without portfolio. He hated the men in suits, as he called them, the palace factotum. And I think that there is a deep state at the palace, which is every bit as unpleasant as Harry paints it. I think there's a kind of awful, snobbish, sort of hierarchy of these, claustrophobic, prancing courtiers, frankly, that I think any virile or robust person would find deeply irritating. I have some sympathy with Meghan because, I can't imagine what it must be like for a kind of dynamic American woman, essentially, to be surrounded by all these drippy debutantes saying, oh, I've got to leave at 2 to get my train to Gloucester and all the rest. I'm sure, she found it, she couldn't understand the culture. She really did not like the British culture, and I understand why she didn't. It can be very annoying.
I think we're good on mine.
Besides for their spouses, what does a social circle look like for the royals? Do they have friends that they can trust? Are those very small circles, or are there, good buddies that they can rely on that offer support, but also that won't betray them?
Well, it's the absolute qualification to be a royal friend is that you're discreet. William has very close friends from Eton. He has a very, very loyal circle that's the same. And Kate's circle is very small, sort of 4 or 5 of her school friends. And her mother is very close to her, and her sister, Pippa. And I would argue that having a very close family is a requisite of being a success if you come into the royal family. I mean, one of the problems for Diana and for Meghan, actually, is they had alienated families. You know, I mean, Diana was very lonely because, you know, she wasn't close to her mother. You know, she'd come from a broken family. She was close-ish to one of her sisters, but then the sister went and married the Queen's private secretary, so she felt that she was sort of in the enemy camp. And, you know, I mean, she always felt she was alone. She really was, which is why she wound up so dependent on sort of cafe society, celebrities, all the wrong people who then leaked constantly. Harry had a very close circle in the army and school, really close. But they've all been alienated, you know, by Meghan, essentially. And of course, Meghan, as we know famously, is completely alienated from her own family. So that you need the robust private circle. And Camilla's family was a very, very, very close family. She's extremely close to her sister, Annabelle. Her father, Major Shand, was a marvelous character who she adored. And her brother was a fabulous character as well. Mark Shand, a sort of world explorer, very colourful. He died only a few years back. So Camilla Shand's family were a very tight and very attractive sort of country family who had each other's backs at all times.
We haven't mentioned Prince Andrew's name. And
funny how that happens.
And you actually devote a fair amount of space in the Palace Papers to Andrew, his circle,
yes.
the Epstein sort of relationship. Talk just a little bit about that. What went wrong with Andrew? What is his kind of current status?
Unfortunately, Andrew is, I mean, he was not a bright bulb. And, you know, talk about a spare, you know, he's just a kind of chortling upper-class idiot, is the truth. And terrible taste in people. You know, he married Fergie, who I actually really like. I mean, she's a very good-hearted woman, but with the worst judgment you'd ever meet in terms of the people she has and how she overspent. And I mean, it was a total car crash. And Andrew really, you know, it was tragic in a way. I mean, he went into the Navy where he excelled, you know, in the Falklands era. As soon as he came out, I mean, this is what happens, is they go into the forces, they come out, and then there's nothing, right? So he comes out, and he stays in the Navy. And Prince Philip, very kind of cruelly actually, wouldn't allow the newlywed, you know, Fergie, his wife, Sarah Ferguson, to go with him, to actually be on the naval base with him. He said she was too distracting. And at that time, it was that sort of, it was a very, you know, she was left alone rattling around in Kensington, St. James's Palace, and Andrew was off in the Navy, and their marriage just kind of went wrong, really, from the start. And he, you know, one of the big issues that confronts these, quote, minor royals is they don't have enough cash to live in the way that they feel, you know, their circle all are. So they have this bind, which we see play out with Meghan and Harry, and it's a bind that they haven't resolved, which is, you know, the minor royal will have between 250 and 400,000 and a house. Okay, they're very nice. I mean, everyone would be most happy to have such a thing. However, they're sort of moving in a world where they're with bankers and all these people with money and so on, and boats and yachts, and they still have to ask for permission to do anything. If they try and make any money, they're excoriated and called users and, you know, exploiters of the brand. So they're in this kind of crunch. They can't make money, and they don't have enough money. That leaves them sort of prey, essentially, to disreputable people who want to be seen in their company. And if you want to, you know, if you want to be seen in the company of a royal and you're willing to give them boats, planes, and you know, consultancies, it's probably because you're a bad person, because only bad people do those kind of things. So gradually, Andrew's circle got more and more sleazy, essentially. And along comes Jeffrey Epstein, who's the sort of epitome of all of that. And he was like a sitting duck. I mean, he's very naive, essentially. And, you know, there's been a tragic consequence for him. I mean, at this point, he's trying to hang on to his house because Charles is very eager to eject him from Royal Lodge where he lives, which was the property of the Queen Mother, who willed it to him, actually. And in fact, in this instance, I think Andrew should not be ejected from Royal Lodge. I mean, you know, he's got it till the end of his life, and it'll go back to the crown. And it seems to me that, you know, the Queen Mother left it to him. He should probably stay there. But, you know, Charles is quite eager to get him out.
Were there others besides Jeffrey Epstein?
Oh, all kinds of ghastly sort of, you know, Lithuanian and, you know, Albanian sort of tin pot people. You know what I mean? Just sort of people with tons of money who got it in ill-gotten ways that he was always seemed to be hanging around with. And the circle was just sleazy. You know, it's not a circle you want to be in, alas.
Just jumping around here a little bit because we've got a lot of different questions from the audience. But the accusations from Prince Harry about senior royals, particularly Camilla and press secretaries, leaking things about him to the press. Would you say that these things should be taken with a pinch of salt or more or less accurate?
Both. I mean, you know, I think there were moments in, there was certain incidents in Harry's past in which, you know, there were, when Charles was trying to rehabilitate the reputation of Camilla, there was definitely a little manipulation from his press office about always making sure that Charles was seen in a good light. There was always a desire to protect William. There was a desire to protect Charles. And if someone had to be slightly thrown under the bus, it would be Harry. So in that sense, he was right that you know, he wasn't given the same kind of protection that his brother was. No one was kind of lying on behalf of Harry, he felt. But, you know, they also did lie on behalf of Harry quite a lot and covered up quite a lot of his more asinine activities. And I think he also discounts just how people gossip. You know, unfortunately, you know, when it came to sort of Meghan and the wedding and all that, she annoyed a lot of people, right? And people gossip. You know, I mean, you can't stop people who are coming into your orbit, assistant secretaries and people who are doing your dress fittings, and I mean, you know, it starts to add up if you offend enough people. And so a narrative got going about Meghan, which Harry and she would like to say was a completely planted narrative, but there are plenty of other people who will say no, she behaved in a way that offended a lot of people, and ultimately it gets out.
One final question: why didn't the Queen visit Israel? Now, I assume that's something that the Foreign Office would not have allowed. Prince William's been. King Charles seems to have expressed an interest. Certainly, coronation has a lot of biblical themes, and oil from the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem. What are the odds that King Charles will end up making a trip to the Holy Land?
I bet he wants to. I mean, he's completely at the call of the Foreign Office. It'll be about whether the Foreign Office wants to do it. I think that would be a splendid thing if he did.
Well, Tina, it's been great fun.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We could pepper you with questions all night, but we've taken far.
Well, thank you very much to everybody who, you know, took the time to come out and hear me maundering on about the royals. Hope you'll read the Palace Papers. It's all there.
It's all there. It's a fascinating book. It's a great pleasure to spend time with you. And thanks to all of you for joining us tonight. Thank you to my colleague AR for helping lead the conversation. We look forward to seeing you all again very soon. Thank you and good night.
Thank you.